Okay, more video. Um, I've been designing algorithms, protocols, standard operating procedures, methodologies for a long time. And it's funny how long it takes people to notice that I've got a better option than them. And then when they adopt that, it's better. And so I'd really just prefer if people didn't waste so much time complaining and they actually paid attention to new ideas that work better, take the time to understand them instead of just dismissing them immediately. So this one is about education. Your education system is crap. I'm sure you've noticed, and you don't try to learn how to do better, which is your fault. So this is, you can read the essay that goes into some of the details. It's on my free blog, never monetized. The essay is called Guidance Counselor, and it's, you just search my name with the title. So I'm just going to go through the main ideas here. First of all, your public school system is not designed to help you in your life. It's never been designed to do that because they don't teach you healthy communication. They don't teach you conflict resolution. They don't teach you proper child care. They don't teach you how to do financial planning and budgeting. They don't teach you how to do your taxes. They don't teach you how to learn on your own. They invest a lot of time in conditioning you to not want to read, conditioning you in fearing mathematics, conditioning you into just cramming for a test because they know about Hebbian learning. H-B-B, or H-E-B-B. Hebbian learning is the actual neuroscience of how your brain works. So when two events happen coincident, when they're happening together, that's the part of your brain that wires together. The neurons produce synapses that wire together. So if they can humiliate you and stress you out every time you're faced with a math problem, that's what wires together. Humiliation and fear. And that's why the majority of the population neurologically actually feels a response in their brain that is identical to physical pain whenever they even hear the word math. They're training you to fear reading and mathematics and problem solving and skill development because they want you to stay incompetent. It makes you easy to control. So let's look at an alternative to public schooling that would work better. And I tried to present this to my guidance counselor when I was 14. And they didn't want to hear it because they were invested in the system that kept them employed. So at school, average school year, this is elementary, middle school, high school, you've got 180 school days. And the number of hours that you're actually spending in class, you've got 7 classes, but you're only really spending part of that hour because there's some time before and after. You only got about 6 hours a day, which means it's about 1,000 hours a year of actual sitting in class time. So 12 years, that's 12,000 hours. We can do a lot better than that. And we can make better use of the time that you are spending. So the idea that you all sit in rows facing a lecturer at the front was modeled after the Prussian military as a method of indoctrination. It was not chosen because it leads to the best comprehension from students. It was chosen because it leads to the most obedience. That's why they chose that method, where you're physically all facing the same direction to a lecturer. When we know for a fact that that's not the best way to educate someone. So instead, we're going to use the methods that we know educate someone best. You've got a teacher and an assistant, and then you got 4 or 5 students. And they're going to work together in a conversation, half hour to an hour long, to solve a particular problem together. The teacher and the assistant present a problem, and the students are working together out loud to figure out the steps they need to take to figure out the problem. So they're learning the skills of how to approach something that they don't understand. What question should I ask? Where do I look for information? How do I check my work to make sure I got it right? What are some of the critiques or potential problems? That skill set is what serves you your entire life. and allows you to become a lifelong learner. Public schools do not want to do that. So then you may ask, well, wait, if you got like 4 or 5 kids and a teacher and an assistant, that's a lot of teachers and assistants. Not really, because the teacher and the assistant are just kids who are further along. And that's not an undue burden. And you'll see why in the hour rates that I talk about. So you've got a teacher who was learning the same topic a few years earlier, and they had to be an assistant first. And then you got an assistant who's also learned the topic earlier, and now they're acting as the assistant for the teacher. And so you got these two people who are training up as teachers in that role. And as a tutor of many years, I can tell you, when you have to think of how to communicate, to respond to someone's confusion, when you have to be able to identify the error in their thinking, it gives you a lot more patience and appreciation for other teachers. And it also helps you really get a solid foundation of the concept, much better than if you're cramming for a test. So taking on that role of teaching sometimes helps a lot of kids to get a better grasp of the concepts and learn how to relate to someone who's still working on it while also relating to someone who's helping them to learn. It's a better integration across the age gaps. So you've got the teacher and assistant are older students. The kids who are learning are a group of 4 or 5 with those two assistants, or the teacher and the assistant. And then you have a bunch of these in a large room who are overseen by just a couple, what you would call teachers, adults who've gone to college and got a teaching credential. So those adults are going over and basically putting out fires. Whenever there's a dispute or disruption, or whenever there's confusion or frustration, they go over to help pull the group back together and get them focused and help resolve any confusions or bring insights. So each of the adults who are getting paid are handling many groups with the actual number of students per adult is a higher ratio. And in these small group discussions, you're working at the pace of the group, which is different from a classroom where everyone's stuffed together and facing the same direction to listen to a lecture. The key concept here is that you would be going to one of these groups to solve a particular problem, and then you take a quiz at the end. And if you don't pass with 100%, then you have to take it again. That seems unfair to lazy, dumb people, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Because if you pass a math class with a C, it means you didn't understand a large portion of the material. And so then when they send you to the next year's math class, you've got all those gaps, which compound. They get worse. And that's how you fall behind. So insisting that each student actually get 100% on the quiz ensures that they retake it until they actually understand the whole topic. They actually understand the material. And then they can safely move on without falling behind because of gaps. So every small group is only meeting for that kind of problem. It's not you're not going to the same teacher and assistant over and over again for 9 months. It's that teacher and that assistant are teaching that problem. And different groups of kids are coming in to learn that particular problem for an hour or so, or less. And they're going to be retaking it as much as they need individually until that student has a full grasp of the concept. If you compare that to our current lecture system, we got a bunch of kids who are at different places in their understanding, and then they just listen to a teacher drone on, and hopefully they were paying enough attention to absorb the material. And if there's any kids who are behind, they slow down the whole class, which means everyone on average is learning a lot slower. And we know from the focused conversations working on a specific problem-centric learning produces much deeper comprehension, and you move through it faster. Your questions get addressed in a less stressful environment. You're able to do more detailed discussion when needed. So in general, instead of spending 1,000 hours sitting in a lecture where it's slowed down for more than half the class because the rest of the class isn't there yet, now most people can progress through the entire curriculum at least twice as fast. So instead of spending 12,000 hours sitting in school getting lectured at, you could spend 6,000 hours and cover the same material. And then you, as an older student, would be helping educate kids who are younger than you, and you'd only be spending about a third to half of that amount of time. So you only spent, you know, 9,000 hours instead of 12,000. So it's still less time for each student to get their full primary education. And there's more students per teacher. And I highly recommend cutting out all the middlemen layers of superintendents and vice principals and all the garbage that gets layered on top. Cut out those middlemen. The students are paying directly into that teacher. So they'll get a much higher salary. And because they have a higher salary and because they have more students per teacher, that allows you to be more selective of who is a teacher. The best teachers will be the ones teaching. That also means you got to get rid of tenure, which teachers love to complain about, but honestly, it's shooting you in the foot. There's no other occupation where you get to be crap at your job and keep it. And it's ridiculous to pretend that tenure is essential to maintain their academic integrity, because you don't have that anymore. You teach the test. Don't pretend tenure is allowing you to discuss important topics like Robin Williams and the Dead Poet Society. That's not what's happening. Tenure's just keeping bad teachers on the job. We all know that. So stop pretending that tenure is actually essential for you being such an independent thinker. It's not. And more pointedly, we also were only teaching 5 days a week for part of the year because back when public schools were invented, it was for farm kids. And they needed to be available in the springtime and the summer for planting and harvest. That was actually what spring break and summer break were for, is to go back to the farm, because they had child labor back then. Well, now if you got 9,000 hours of school time across 12 years, how many is that per day if you're spreading it out evenly across all the days? Maybe you go to the site on weekends for a few hours, right? You've only got 670 hours a year to cover in 365 days. That's less than 2 hours a day. So you could go through the primary school system just showing up each day for 2 hours a day, every day of the year. Maybe you go on vacation sometimes for a few weeks. You just double up afterwards. You're there for 3 or 4 hours for a few weeks. That would be it. And if you only have to show up 2 hours a day for school, then you don't have to force kids to wake up insanely early when we know that their hormones and their circadian rhythm, their biological clock, does not help them waking up that early. Kids actually need more sleep, and they will be sleeping later into the morning. You're just going to have to accept that fact about that age group. It's just natural. And when you insist that they wake up early, then they don't get enough sleep. And we know a lot of science about how you cannot learn. You don't retain information unless you got enough sleep. When I was tutoring, I normally had to tell kids, you need more sleep and you need a more complete diet. And that's going to do much more for you across all your topics than me just hammering you with quiz questions until you've memorized an equation. That's not going to do it for you. You're going to forget that equation a year or 2 years from now. You're going to have to relearn it for the next class. You're never going to use it in the real world. So let them sleep in. They go to school every day of the week, every day of the year, except for vacations they want to take, which is on their own schedule. That means they only need 2 hours a day. And so they're not stressed out, they're not overwhelmed, they're not bored, they're not tired. They're able to focus on their work. They talk it through in a problem-centric learning space as a small group. And then they take a quiz on it. And they're going to retake that particular problem until they get it 100%. So you're making sure that however long kids need, they're not out of the system until they actually covered the topics. You're not going to have a 60% high school literacy rate. You're not going to have the majority of Americans with a 6th grade reading level. And that lowers the stress because of the smaller group. It's less confrontational. And it also means that you get to gain facility, you get to get that expertise before you're moved on to the next topic, so you don't have gaps that make you feel stupid. So you leave the public school system with real competencies, and you're not dissuaded from thinking problems through and learning on your own. So that's an option. There are other details we can go into, but I'll stop there.